Dr. Lim Wee Kiat.
Sir, all Singaporeans and permanent residents are covered under our national MediShield Life health insurance scheme. MediShield Life is universal, covers pre-existing conditions, and provides basic protection against large healthcare bills.
Excuse me, SMS to confirm, are you taking 24 to 31?
I beg your pardon, sir. Yes. Can I take 24 to 31 together, please,
yes,
sir?
Please proceed.
If I may continue, sir, MediShield Life can be used both in public and private healthcare institutions, and coverage is sized to be sufficient for subsidized care. The government provides means-tested subsidies for MediShield Life premiums, and MediSave can be used to pay for premiums to keep them affordable. Individuals may choose to purchase an integrated shield plan, IP plan, which provides additional benefits beyond MediShield Life to provide more coverage for private healthcare services. MediSave can be used to pay for IP premiums subjected to withdrawal limits to help defray the cost of private insurance. Currently, less than 1% of Singapore residents have a standard IP plan. 10% have a Class B1 IP, 20% have a Class A IP, and 40% have a private hospital IP. In addition, some individuals may also purchase riders on top of their IP plans if they prefer additional coverage and can afford the premiums. Riders commonly cover the deductible and co-payment portions of the bill. Riders are fully private insurance products that must be paid by cash, and MediSave withdrawals are not allowed for rider premiums. Less than half of Singapore residents have riders. So let me just summarize this part. In essence, MediShield Life is universal. It's sized to cover the bulk of the large hospital bills for subsidized care. IP plans stay right on top of this to provide for hospital bills, and riders go even further on top of the IP plans to cover for the deductibles and the co-payment. So it is almost, you can see, as a three-tier thing. MOH does track and monitor the bills from both public and private healthcare institutions. Private healthcare costs have been rising rapidly in Singapore. Between 2007 to 2019, private hospital bills among IP cases grew at 4%, twice as fast as unsubsidized bills in public healthcare institutions. In both private and public hospitals, investigations, surgeons' fees, treatment services, and operating theatre facility fees were key drivers of cost growth for private patients. In 2016, the Health Insurance Task Force, HITF, comprising members from the Singapore Medical Association, the SMA, Life Insurance Association, the LIA, Consumers Association of Singapore, CASE, MOH, and MAS, had recommended various measures, such as paneling and fee benchmarks, to help contain claims, I beg your pardon, let me say that again, to help contain claims and healthcare cost escalation. MOH has been working to implement the HITF recommendations. Fee benchmarks have been rolled out since 2018, along with appropriate care guidelines. One of the recommendations from the HITF was to introduce a minimum co-payment requirement, as IP riders that fully covered deductibles and co-payment had contributed to rising private healthcare costs. The co-payment ensures what we call skin in the game, to encourage patients and their doctors to make careful and deliberate treatment decisions on the choice of treatment and the type of care they need. MOH therefore introduced a minimum 5% co-payment for all new private riders in 2018. The IP insurers have also extended this requirement, or alternative claims-based pricing, from April 2021 to their existing policyholders with riders. While this is not a requirement imposed by MOH, the Ministry does support the move as it will help to encourage appropriate care. To provide some assurance to policyholders who are concerned with potentially large co-payments, MOH therefore allowed insurers to apply a $3,000 co-payment cap for treatment from panelled doctors with a negotiated fee arrangements with insurers. This would mean that bills above $60,000 are capped at $3,000 co-payment. To put things in perspective, less than 3% of inpatient bills in private hospitals today exceed this $60,000. So the vast majority of inpatient bills do not actually hit the $3,000 co-payment cap. This co-payment cap could not be applied to all claims, as it would negate the effect of co-payment once the $3,000 cap was reached. Let me explain. Take, for example, if the co-payment applies to all claims, policyholders may choose a treatment which costs $100,000 instead of another equally effective treatment at $70,000. This is because the policyholder would pay the same amount of $3,000 for either option once they breach the $60,000 limit where the $3,000 payment cap has been reached. The additional costs would then be borne by the insurer, and this eventually translates to higher premiums for other policyholders. Therefore, the cap was applied to panelled doctors, where there are established fee arrangements to ensure that appropriate and cost-effective treatment is provided. Some have raised concerns with regard to the use of panels. Questions have been raised on whether limited panel sizes are in the best interest of the patients, and whether such practices are anti-competitive in nature, or if there are medical ethical concerns around such practices. The use of panels was recommended by the HITF. Internationally, panels have been used by some countries to keep healthcare costs more predictable, to reduce variation in practices and charging. These practices do not contravene the Competition Act, as any decision to empanel doctors is made by individual insurers independently with the doctors on mutually agreed and acceptable terms. Such practices do not restrict insurers from competing with one another on their prices, insurance products, or choice of doctors. Nevertheless, MOH has encouraged insurers to make their panel selection criteria more transparent, a move that is also supported by the LIA in its Panel Good Practices Guide to all insurers. On the issue of medical ethics, the Singapore Medical Council's Ethical Code and Ethical Guidelines stipulates that doctors should have the best interests of their patients at heart when treating them. This includes prescribing appropriate and cost-effective care that best meets the needs of their patients. Access to medical care and clinical judgment should therefore not be influenced by empanelment, nor any other financial constraints or pressures inherent in any health system. Should doctors find that the conditions of being on the panel would impose constraints on their ability to care for their patients, they may decide for medical ethical reasons to not participate in such panels. We want to emphasize that patients can make claims for all treatments covered under their IP, regardless of whether the specialist is on the panel or not. Nevertheless, some doctors have expressed concerns that IP panels do not have an adequate number of specialists, restricting referrals to the appropriate specialists who may not be on the panel, and therefore limiting the continuity of care. Patients have also raised concerns that the doctor they are comfortable with or are familiar with is not on the panel of their IP insurer, and they may not enjoy the additional benefits such as the $3,000 co-payment cap. To address this, MOH has encouraged all insurers to grow the size of their panels, and some have already increased the number of specialists on their panels by more than 40% since August 2019. Today, more than 70% of private specialists are on at least one IP panel. Some have asked insurance panels to be expanded to include all doctors, so long as they do not have a poor track record with the Singapore Medical Council or SMC. However, some doctors may choose not to be empaneled, as they may already have a sufficient pool of patients, so the doctors do have a choice to not be on panels. This is especially the case for areas where there are very few specialists locally. Hence, MOH encourages IP insurers to enhance their pre-authorization processes, to give approval for hospitalization or treatments and their associated costs beforehand. With pre-authorization, insurers are able to assess treatments for medical necessity and fee arrangements and appropriateness, including for doctors who are not on their panel. And patients can also have the greater peace of mind, knowing that at least a significant portion of their bill will be covered by their IP. With pre-authorization, the risk of runaway bill sizes would then be minimized. Hence, some insurers have extended the co-payment cap to pre-authorized claims for treatment by non-panel doctors to provide policyholders with greater assurance, and we certainly encourage more to do so. While policyholder benefits may differ depending on whether they see a panel doctor or a non-panel doctor who is pre-authorized, these benefits should not differ to the extent of prohibiting patients from seeing non-panel doctors or influence patient choices in an undesirable way. MOH recognizes that some policyholders may wish to switch insurers, whether for more competitive premiums or for better benefits such as access to more panel doctors, but are unable to do so because of pre-existing conditions. IPs are commercial products, and their features and pricing are ultimately determined by private insurers. MOH will study whether IP insurance can be made fully portable, including looking at examples abroad. However, insurers may potentially need to increase the premium significantly for all policyholders to price in the increased risk they assume for portable IP that covers pre-existing conditions. This is why MediShield Life is designed as a scheme to cover all Singaporeans for life, with no exclusions, and covers all pre-existing conditions to give reassurance to all Singaporeans should they choose to relinquish their private IP plans for whatever reasons. Over the last 5 years, about 5% of IP policyholders relinquish their IP per year on average. This could be because they may have opted for different coverage after considering the cost of the premiums, their financial resources, and their different healthcare needs. Their average age was 34. Data on the number of policyholders who did not subsequently purchase a new IP or were later admitted to public hospitals is not available. Consumers should understand their IP terms and conditions when choosing their IPs. Insurers offer policyholders enhanced policy benefits such as the co-payment cap, lower deductibles, or a longer period of pre- and post-hospitalization coverage for panel treatments. All this must be made known to the policyholder prior to policy purchase, and at least 30 days before any changes in policyholders' benefits. Policyholders must be properly advised at the point of purchase or renewal about their coverage, so they can make informed choices about their IP and choice of doctors and care setting. Some have asked if insurers can simply use MOH's fee benchmarks to determine all insurance payouts. As fee benchmarks are designed to be reasonable ranges of fees for the large majority of cases, insurers can generally take reference from the benchmarks for most payouts. Doctors do charge below and above the benchmarks depending on the nature and the complexity of the cases. However, insurers also need to take into account the medical complexity and specific clinical circumstances and deviate from the benchmarks for justifiable and exceptional cases. According to LIA, between 5% to 15% of IP claims for certain fees were approved above the upper bound of the fee benchmarks, depending on the insurer. Claim scrutiny by insurers may have been perceived as challenging a doctor's professional judgment. Insurers scrutinize claims to ascertain whether treatments were medically necessary and charged appropriately. This actually protects the interests of policyholders who may otherwise see their insurance premiums rise should claims be paid out indiscriminately. MOH recognizes that this is an important process for the integrity of the healthcare system, and it is a common practice internationally. It is nonetheless important that the process be handled professionally and efficiently by each insurer. Insurers should not make the process onerous and ask for unnecessary information unrelated to the claims, imposing a heavy administrative burden on the doctors. The questions and information sought for common conditions can be standardized and streamlined, so it will not be perceived as questioning the decisions and judgment of the doctors. If a particular claim is justified, insurers should pay according to the policy benefits. We will be looking more into this issue. Dr. Tan Wu Meng has raised concerns with the risks of IP insurers exiting the market. To ensure that insurers remain financially sound and are able to meet their obligations to policyholders, MAS exercises regulatory oversight over the insurer's financial standing, risk management, and governance. This is accomplished through measures such as establishing regulatory capital requirements and setting corporate governance and risk management requirements and guidance, which are in turn reinforced by regular on-site inspections and close engagement with the boards and senior management of insurers. MAS also takes action against insurers whose practices are found to be wanting or where there are breaches of MAS's regulation. An insurer may decide to exit the IP market because of commercial reasons or due to insolvency. In the event that an insurer exits the IP market, the insurer or the liquidator will seek to arrange for the IP policies to be transferred to another insurer for continuity of coverage. MAS will ensure that the existing insurer and the insurer taking over the IP policies properly account for policyholders' interests. The various initiatives covered above will take time to bear fruit. However, we are confident that these measures will help to keep healthcare costs more sustainable. Looking ahead, the refinement of various IP features will continue to be a multilateral effort between MOH, hospitals, doctors, and the insurers. To support these efforts, MOH appointed a 12-member Multilateral Healthcare Insurance Committee, or MHIC, in April this year to provide a platform for healthcare providers, payers, consumer representatives, and the government to work on these issues related to health insurance. The MHIC comprises representatives from the Academy of Medicine Singapore, AMS, the Consumer Association of Singapore, CASE, the Fees Benchmark Advisory Committee, the Life Insurance Association, LIA, the Singapore Medical Association, SMA, private hospital representatives, and with the Monetary Authority of Singapore as an observer. For a start, the committee will prioritize 4 specific work streams. First, panels and pre-authorization, including streamlining the processes I spoke about earlier. 2, issues pertaining to improving transparency across the board, including providing more detailed and itemized information about healthcare bills and publishing data on claims and premiums so that insurers, providers, and policyholders can make better informed decisions. 3, establishing a claims complaints process supported by AMS and LIA so that stakeholders have an avenue for recourse should they feel unfairly treated, such as where insurers or patients may wish to raise concerns about over-servicing or overcharging, or if doctors have concerns about certain insurer practices. And 4, examining the issues from a patient and consumer-centric viewpoint to ensure that the patient and public interests are best safeguarded. On this particular last issue, CASE will be leading a subcommittee to the MHIC to deal with the matter comprehensively. As these issues are complex, some time will be required for the committee to develop and agree on practical solutions. Processes within the institutions, hospitals, clinics may also have to be adjusted to make it more seamless and streamlined. The committee has already begun its work with the first meeting held on 27th of April. MHIC will share its recommendations progressively as they are ready and is working towards a first round of recommendations in the next few months. The issues surrounding IPs are multifaceted and require thorough discussions as well as careful balancing of various considerations to find solutions that best benefit policyholders and patients. With continued healthy dialogue through the MHIC, MOH will work together with all stakeholders towards developing sustainable solutions for policyholders, payers, and providers alike. Thank you, sir.
Mr. Pritam Singh.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. Thank you, Senior Minister of State, for the extended comments on this issue. The recent public exchange between the Singapore Medical Association and the Life Insurance Association of Singapore has put into focus the role of the regulator, namely MOH. Even as I acknowledge SMS's establishment of the MHIC, which has been set up to look into some of these issues, I have nonetheless two supplementary questions for the SMS. Firstly, would MOH, as the regulator, be amenable to setting up a database transparent to both doctors and insurers to allow parties to compare and assess their bill sizes with a view to better manage medical inflation in the public interest? The second supplementary question is in conjunction with the first, which is, together with the establishment of the database, would MOH as regulator consider setting up an independent panel of assessors under its purview, which would be accessible to patients, doctors, and insurers to resolve disputes about fees and the necessity of medical procedures? Thank you.
So I thank Mr. Singh for his questions. In fact, these two items are actually already being done. The first one on the database for bill sizes, when we have the Fee Benchmark Advisory Committee, in fact, the database on fees that are charged across a diverse range of procedures across various institutions are already available for the committee, which comprises of practitioners and insurers to actually collectively deliberate on what the kind of benchmarking ought to be. So yes, the database is available, and I think that will provide some scrutiny by the relative stakeholders to ensure that whether it's payouts, whether it is benchmarking, are considered fair to the policyholders and to the payers as well. The second issue on independent assessment, as you hear from my reply earlier, we will be setting up a claims complaints panel that comprises of the insurers plus also the Academy of Medicine of Singapore, which are specialists in the respective fields. So that provides some degree of independence from the professional side of both the stakeholders to really look at any areas in which, whether it's insurers or doctors, have got some unhappiness over the way payments are done or the way a certain case is being assessed by either party. So yes, there will be an independent panel that is really going to be in the works.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. Let me thank the SMS for his answer. Definitely limiting the choice of doctors for patients and insured individuals. Personally, I feel that definitely this is to the disadvantage to the patient. I can't understand how this is not anti-competitive. By limiting choice to the patient itself, this will limit patients' ability in terms of choosing the right doctors. Unless you are telling me that the empanelment, which means in our panel itself, comprises more than 50% of all doctors in Singapore, to make sure that each insurer must have a certain percentage of doctors on it. Second thing is that if the purpose of empanelment is to control fees, doesn't your fee benchmark does that already? With the fee benchmark in place itself, then can we remove the panel completely? That's something that you would consider about. Last of all, on this point, I also do agree with our leader of opposition. Will MOH be coming up with the ranking of the insurers? Because MOH will be seen as a neutral party to this itself, and this is to protect the consumer. Thank you.
So I thank Dr. Lim for his questions. Now, I think the issue of whether the limited size of certain panels within certain insurers, I think, as I said in my reply, it will be very difficult to say that we make the panels 100% because doctors have a choice not to be on panels as well, right? And I think the more important way to look at this is how can we make sure care is accessible to all patients, whether the mechanism is empanelment or otherwise. I think that the key is to make sure patients have access to any doctor they want to see, which is why I think the better way to go for is actually look at pre-authorization. With pre-authorization, the doctor puts in his diagnosis, gives a certain quote on the treatment cost that is needed, and the insurer have a chance to see whether this cost is fair and whether the type of treatment that is proposed is reasonable for the kind of diagnosis that is being put forth. And I think in that sense, then patient can have access to any doctor subject to a pre-authorization if they are not on panel. And I think this is a mechanism that is already available today, but what we need to do is make sure the process is much more streamlined and seamless so that there is not too much administrative burden on the clinics and the patient doesn't have to wait too long for this process to be completed before they can access to care by a different doctor, by a different specialist. In terms of ranking of insurers, I think what's important is to have this information on how each insurer price their policies and what benefits they have transparently so that patients or policyholders themselves can make a comparison and take a look. It's very hard to say which is insurer ranked number one or which is ranked at the bottom because they may have product differentiation that meets different persons' needs. And for a person where the product meets his needs, he could be number one as an insurer. But if the other product meets the other person's needs better, that could be number one in the other person's eyes. And I think it's very hard for MOH to decide from one person to the next which is the best product to suit the person's needs. What we should do is put up more information so that patients and policyholders can make the right informed choices.
Dr. Tan Wu Meng.
Mr. Speaker, I thank the Senior Minister of State for his detailed answer. I'd like to raise supplementary questions along two themes: patient voices and patients' ability to negotiate in the market. On the issue of patient voices, Mr. Speaker, can the SMS assure us that MOH's proposed dispute resolution mechanism will actively involve the patient perspective and the journey experienced by patients, whether as existing policyholders navigating the IP system or potential policyholders or former policyholders who may feel excluded? My Clementi residents who are on integrated shield plans, some of them, they tell me of the challenges involved in making a claim despite having been with the same firm for many years, despite the full support of the doctor looking after them, whether the doctor is in the private or public sector. On the second question, Mr. Speaker, that of the bargaining power of patients and policyholders and consumers. The SMS earlier spoke about the scenario of what happens if an IP insurer exits the market. He said that there would be a negotiation or discussion between the agencies and the insurance provider about ensuring that patients are covered. But I asked the ministry, in the event of an IP insurer exiting the market, is there a mechanism to ensure that patients who already have existing conditions will be appropriately covered and recognized in a way that does not disadvantage them if the insurer exits the market? I furthermore would like to ask MOH whether MOH will consider establishing some kind of regulatory backstop to protect patients, because once you have a mechanism in policy to protect patients when an insurer exits the market, to allow these patients to transit in a way that is non-discriminatory, not unfavorable to another insurer, I put it to the ministry that can be the beginning of a mechanism to allow patients to transition between insurers. And I suggest to the ministry that once patients have the option of transiting with the potential for having pre-existing conditions covered to some extent, as in the case in other regulatory jurisdictions like Australia, there is better bargaining power for the consumer, and that leads to a better functioning market as well. Thank you.
So I thank Dr. Tan for his clarification and questions. On his first question pertaining to patient voices, should there be a dispute by the policyholder against the insurer? What mechanisms are there today to address some of these grievances? Actually, today, FDREC, the Financial Dispute Resolution Center, has already a mechanism in place to address any policyholders' concerns pertaining to whether it's their policy terms or unfair treatment by their insurer. So FDREC is a mechanism that's already available, but we do feel that with the better patient public education, that will actually raise the awareness of the consumers' rights and when they think that their rights under the policy terms have been violated. So better patient education, better policyholder education is another important thrust to get this done. So we welcome the fact that CASE will be forming a subcommittee under the MHIC to further study this issue and also to look at how they can better represent the voices of consumers, policyholders, and patients. On the second issue on the what would happen if the insurers were to exit the financial sector. Now, if an insurer fails and undergoes winding up processes under the Insurance Act, the appointed liquidator is required to endeavour as far as possible and reasonably practicable to sell or transfer the whole or part of the insurance business to another insurer before considering other options. The Policy Owners Protection Scheme, or PPF scheme, is also in place, which aims to provide coverage for policies which are commonly purchased by consumers and or cause significant impact or disruption to policyholders should the insurer fail. This would include accident and health policies such as IP plans, which will be fully covered under the PPF scheme in an event that an insurer fails. The PPF scheme does not merely provide compensation of crystallized claims when an insurer fails, but also seeks to ensure continuity where possible for the affected policyholders in the event of an insurer's failure. For example, it could also fund a transfer or run off of the IP portfolio business to another IP insurer to ensure continuity of coverage for the affected policyholders if necessary. And in Singapore, what is useful for Singaporean citizens is to always know at the back of their mind that they have a safety net called MediShield Life. Should all else fails, MediShield Life will be here to cover you universally with no exclusion on all your pre-existing conditions for life.
Mr. Yip Hon Weng.
So, Deputy Speaker, sir, I thank the SMS for his reply. I just have one SQ, which is whether this method of empaneling doctors will impact patients who may need to change doctors halfway during their treatment for whatever reasons. Thank you.
So I think this is also in the same vein as the expanding the panel of doctors, which is why one of the work stream that the MHIC endeavours to do as one of their earliest priorities to look at how they can further expand and streamline the pre-authorization process. I think once we can get a more seamless and streamlined pre-authorization process, effectively opens up access to care for all doctors. And the patient then don't have to really worry about so much about whether you're panel or non-panel. The difference, of course, is in some of the benefits for panel and non-panel doctors, but today, any IP-insured patient can actually have access to non-panel doctors through pre-authorization already. So at the moment, there is actually no restriction of care, but there is some friction in the process. So with pre-authorization, hopefully we can make this much more seamless and reduce a lot more anxiety for a patient going for treatment when they have to go beyond a panel to access specialists outside the panel. So I hope that will help the members to understand that the MHIC will prioritize this as one of the key streams they want to work at.
Okay. Mr. Gerald Giam.
Sir, private hospitals house less than 17% of hospital beds in Singapore. And the SMS just replied to my question and said that 40% of Singaporeans hold an integrated shield plan for private hospital coverage. This points to a rather high proportion of voluntary downgrading by patients, meaning that they are eligible to seek treatment in private hospitals, but end up going to public hospitals. Does the SMS think that Singaporeans are overinsured for private insurance, which they don't use? And secondly, are there plans to better educate Singaporeans about their options of different integrated shield plans so they don't get all the information from insurance agents who are trying to sell them private hospital plans?
So I thank the members for his questions. I think the second question is easier to answer. We'll just put out as much information as possible, whether it's on the MOH website, whether it's on the LIA website, and of course, CASE can play a stronger role in patient and policyholder education as well. But I think for his first question, he's conflating two different numbers together that doesn't quite necessarily gel. Just because there are only 17% of hospital beds doesn't mean 40% of people cannot buy insurance for private sector. It doesn't mean that everybody who buys a policy gets sick and gets admitted to the hospital all at the same time. Right? And so it is a choice to buy. It doesn't necessarily mean that they will necessarily have to consume. And it doesn't necessarily mean that the size of the number of beds we have should then limit the amount of policy coverage a particular segment of population goes for. I hope that helps him to understand why the numbers should not necessarily be conflated together.
Dr. Tan Wu Ming, you just make it a very short supplementary, then we'll move on to the next topic.
I thank the SMS for its further clarifications. I want to put on record as a declaration that I'm a medical doctor looking after patients in the public sector for avoidance of ambiguity. I thank the SMS again, and I very much support any further analysis of this issue by the Ministry and look forward to updates in due course. Thank you very much.